On deck with Mercury. I am the town manager here in the town of Vienna, and we have this evening a conversation about law enforcement, policing in Vienna, the use of force and modern challenges that police officers and police departments sometimes have. We have with us three guests that will help us in this conversation. They'll introduce themselves in a few minutes, but I just want to say first that we will have plenty of time for questions at the end of the panel discussion, so please hold your questions until the end. We hope to have this panel discussion go to about 6:45 or 6:50 or so, and then leave the balance of the time for questions and comments from the audience here. We'll go until about 8 o'clock this evening. Also, we'll just like to let you know that we will also have this continually once a month, as you all know, and next month we have some topics kind of narrowed down what we'll talk about in September and in the months to come. So at this point, I'll look to my panelists here and ask them to introduce themselves. First, we have Chief Morris, so tell us a little bit about yourself and why you became a police officer and your background.
Sure. Yeah, as Mercury said, I'm Chief Jim Morris. I came to Vienna in 2013 as the police chief. Prior to that, I was with Fairfax County. I originally came to Fairfax County from Western Pennsylvania after I graduated college. Joined Fairfax County in 1989. While I was with Fairfax, I held positions from patrol in Oakton to a supervisor in McLean to a station commander in Franconia. And then I spent a great deal of time in Fairfax's Internal Affairs Bureau, both as a detective and then also as a major. Ended up in Fairfax as a deputy chief of administration, deputy chief of investigations. And right before I came to Vienna, I was appointed the acting chief of police when Chief Rohr took over deputy county exec for public safety. That's when I came to Vienna in 2013, just for a change. I could retire from Fairfax. And what really appealed to me for Vienna was the closeness of the community and the 40 officers, 50 employees. In Fairfax, I had 1,600 people. I was promoting people I didn't even know. I was riding elevators with people I didn't even know. And now in Vienna, I can see every single one of my people once a week at a minimum. So.
Okay, thank you. And Sergeant Kristen Rudy, introduce yourself and give a little bit about your background.
Hello everyone, my name is Kristen Ruddy. I'm currently a sergeant on the Vienna Police Department, working the midnight shift when I'm not pregnant. Right now I'm in plain clothes until the baby is born and I return. I've been there about 13 years, and in my time there I've been in patrol. I worked several years as a detective, and then I got promoted to sergeant. I've been on the bike team. I run the RAD Women's Self-Defense class that we offer to the community. I'm an FTI bike team member. My experience kind of runs the gamut on the opportunities we have in Vienna. And I became a police officer mostly because I'm a person who likes to help. I'm a person who likes to influence. I'm the oldest child, so I like, being the boss. Had a lot of practice doing that. So I have no problem, inserting myself if I need to and guiding people to the resources they need in order to get themselves out of what most people are experiencing as crisis when the police get involved. So if I can be there to kind of guide and support and put them in the direction to get out of crisis, that's why I became and remain a police officer.
Okay, thank you. And Tony Thomas, you had it here last month, the last discussion, and so tell us a little bit about your background.
My name is Anthony Thomas. I worked for the Sheriff's Office for 26 years. I worked my way up through the ranks as a lieutenant. I worked everything from the booking desk to community outreach programs and so forth. I did 5 years on the U.S. Marshal Service. My last 10 or 12 years, I was an EEO officer in IA, Internal Affairs. So I investigated officers who had complaints on them. The reason I became an officer, I wanted to see a change, and the only way that you can actually make a change is become part of it. When I got into that line of work, it was different from 1983 when I joined to where it is now. So I believe that when I went in, I had a mission to make a change, and I think I had touched a couple of people. So I'm glad that I had that opportunity to join the force.
All right, thank you. And Chief, I know that there are a few police officers in the audience. Maybe you can introduce them and kind of
Sure.
get a background.
Joining us this evening is the police department's command staff. I have Deputy Chief Dan Janicki. Again, Dan came over with Fairfax County shortly after I got here. He came over as a deputy chief. He also has 25 years with Fairfax County, hostage negotiator, peer support, was a member of the SWAT team, on just a wide range of experience. Lieutenant Tom Taylor, with Vienna, he oversees patrol functions, the traffic division, patrol operation. He's currently our PPE expert. Stores all the PPE, make sure we're getting it ordered, make sure it gets in. Lieutenant Art Silmore, he's in charge of investigations. Art, again, brings a wide range of experience from being a detective to being a narcotics detective. He currently heads up, like I said, the investigations unit. I've also brought him tonight because he oversees our internal affairs function. So when a complaint does come in, I often just, we sit down as a command staff, but at the end of the day, it ends up getting up assigned to Art to oversee the investigation and to put the case to paper. And then we have Lieutenant Tu Farhan. Takes care of the dispatch function, the records function. Again, he has worked undercover with the DEA in the past, so he brings another wide range of experience, but he does a lot of the administrative record keeping. I know over the last week or so, you've seen stats in the Vienna Voice, you've seen stats in the mailing to the community. Those guys are the ones that got all that put together for us as we move forward.
Okay, all right, thank you. So I have a few questions for you all, and answer them as you hear them. I know you'll chime in when you have something to add. The first question is: provide us with an overview of policing in Vienna. How is it done, and is there any comparison with what we do in Vienna with other jurisdictions in our region?
Sure. Like I mentioned, being at different places throughout the county, the Oaktons, the McLeans, the Franconias, the Springfields, it's still police work. But in Vienna, the difference in Vienna is the community, and it is the level we can engage with the community. That's the big difference to me. Yeah, we still have calls for service. Not as many, oftentimes not as serious, but we also have serious calls. We're in the middle of a stolen car epidemic, for lack of a better term. And those cars are showing up in DC and Baltimore and PG. So we know who's taking those cars. Those are people coming into the community to take cars. So we have crime to address, but then also we have the community. And we get to do things like Viva Vienna, the Oktoberfest, chilling on church, and the officers get to interact with the community. That is the number one difference for me. That's what I've never experienced anywhere I've ever been, is that level of interaction. Certainly the number one problem we are asked to address is traffic, and we write over 8,000 tickets a year. But at the same time, the officers are out in the community interacting with everybody, and that's what I really like about it. Kristen is a midnight supervisor, so I'd like, maybe she could talk for a minute just about what's the typical midnight shift in Vienna look like for her and her officers.
So it does vary throughout the year. In the summer months, obviously, we're a little busy as people are out. Later, with the daylights lasting longer. In the winter, people tend to go home when it gets dark out and bundle up. So we do see a slowdown in the winter, but our typical midnight shift is responding to calls in the beginning. We work 7 to 7. So, we're taking reports as people come home from work and they're realizing that things may have happened on their property, either while they were gone or before they left for work and didn't have time to make those reports. We get a lot of vehicle tamperings, so those come in too. We do a lot of business patrols and, get out on foot, go out and interact with the community as we have the time as they're out. And then as people kind of bundle in for the night, we drive all night long, patrolling the neighborhoods, looking for vehicles that seem out of sorts. Right now we're in a vehicle tampering, stolen auto epidemic, for lack of a better word, where we're getting hit hard with those. And PSA, lock your doors. They are unlocked vehicles that are mostly getting hit. Very rarely do we have a vehicle broken into with force. But we want to obviously intercept people who are doing those things. So it's looking for suspicious activity, maintaining a presence in the neighborhood so that people are deterred and perhaps move on or change their minds completely and not commit those crimes. At night, typically, that's when alcohol-related offenses start to happen. So we respond to a lot of that kind of stuff, either a drunk in public, fights, domestics, people who may blend in with the crowd during the busy days here stand out a little bit more. So we may get calls more for people who are in need of services, maybe mental health services or a shelter. During the winter, we bring people to homeless shelters a lot. But they tend to stand out more when there's less people out. So we'll get calls for those people a lot during the midnight shift.
Okay, thank you. Community policing is a term we hear a lot. What is community policing, and how do we do it in Vienna? So I'll start with the chief, and then maybe Tony, you can weigh in.
I was going to say maybe Tony could give a perspective about what he's seen being a resident. But to me, community policing is being part of the community. Like I said, with Fairfax and other departments, it's a punchline. It's, we want to do community policing. We do community policing here. We are part of the community. It's, as Kristen says, the calls for service, I would say 90% of the time when we respond on something, we know the people we're responding to. We've seen them before. We've seen them in a restaurant. We've seen them on the street. Some of the businesses, you get highlights. Some of the residents we're at all the time. But to me, that's community policing. It's knowing your community and working with it. Our goal is not just to arrest people. Our goal is to get services to people and to interact with people. Just today, the woman, a house down from where the police station will be built, turned 93. We showed up with a birthday cake and balloons and everything. That to me is community policing. You know the community. That the deputy chief and I walk for coffee to Dunkin' Donuts every single day. We talk to so many people. People come out and give us an umbrella when it's raining. To me, that's community policing, and the officers the same way. Tom and two, they eat at every restaurant in town any given week, on a regular basis. But that's to me, they're part of the community, and that's the special part about it. And it's like Tony, like with you, it would be interesting growing up in Vienna and seeing it, but also having a law enforcement background.
Community policing is interesting. Growing up, there was a big part of Vienna police officers being in the community because they would go out and recruit you to play Little League football because they was coaches and so forth. Fast forward now, it's hard for officers to really get involved with the youth sports because they don't live in the community. But they can get out in the community and socialize and find out who are the important people in the community and make bases and touch bases with them as far as the ministers, the churches, any other program, maybe the after school program, they can actually sit down and go there. The Road Dog Camp, which Fairfax County runs that, I don't know if Vienna has that, but kids can sign up for it, and they actually take kids from certain communities and put them into this Road Dog Camp, and they take them around, and officers are the camp advisors and participate in that. So the only thing that I see different now is that the officers may not get involved as much as outside of work as they did back then, but they're doing it more on the job now.
That's good. Anything else you'd like to add, maybe, Sergeant Ruddy?
Well, I think that opportunities like the Cops and Kids Fun Run and activities where the police department sponsors programs like the RAD self-defense class, it's an opportunity for us to be proactive and give resources to people to prevent crimes from happening in the first place. So really getting involved with those programs, encouraging people to spread those programs through word of mouth. That's really important to us, and we really value the time that we spend with citizens in programs like that. Viva Vienna, we walk through all day long and just chat and get to meet the community that we're serving. So we love doing that kind of stuff.
And the RAD program's a perfect example. I mean, it's a program we put on, but it's also supported, and Kristen can tell you, by a lot of volunteers that help support it, town residents that help support it. So that's an example of an outstanding program that is also supported by the community. It's a shame we have to have it off-site, hoping to bring it with the new station on-site where we can have it as part of the station, as part of the activities at the station. But it's a great program. Kristen, that fills up every single time it's offered.
That's great.
And along with community policing is you're breaking down the stereotype of police officers.
Right.
This is a chance for the individual to get a chance to know the officers without that first experience in being a 911 call. And then if it does happen, they see a face, they can trust that face, and it makes the encounter between those two a little easier than what it would have if they hadn't been there.
So our next topic here we'll talk about is, in large part, the reason why we're doing this evening, and it's the topic of use of force. I think that a lot of people across the country and our region are looking at that whole topic. So maybe talk a little bit about use of force. What is it, and how do our Vienna police officers use use of force, and what does that look like?
Sure. Use of force is one of the two main topics a police department has to make sure that they're on top of, both with policy, practice, training, and the way they apply it. Use of force and pursuits are the two major ones. Your policies better mirror what needs to be done. Given national events, it deserves to be under the microscope. And that's why, as we saw with the mailing and some council meetings, we put ours under the microscope, and we looked at it as part of the Obama pledge that we were going to review our policies. Do they match up? Are what we want them to say? And we made some changes. We made some adjustments. We made sure everything's up front in the policy, not buried throughout general orders. We made sure let's put it up front where it's clearly spelled out and an officer can see it and read it. So I think that's important, because use of force, to me, I like to refer to it as response to resistance, not actually use of force. It is use of force, and that's the term, but if it's being done right, you're responding to the resistance you're being met with. And if you're not being met with any resistance, you shouldn't be using any force. Officers, 99.9% of the time, talk their way into situations, talk their way to settle a situation, talk their way to calm things down, and that's their job. And that's where I think we need to continue spending money, spending time, spending training, rewarding the officers that can do that, because that's where an officer is effective. When that doesn't work and you have to use force, then certainly we all want them to use it appropriately, properly, and within compliance of the policies. And we want to make sure our policies mirror that. And then when force is used, the second part of it is you have to make sure you track it. You have to know it's being used. I'm not on the street at night. Kristen is half the nights. We have to make sure we're reporting it properly. And again, through some of the mailings and some of the information we've sent out, I think we've shown we do track it, we do report it. Kristen can explain just that when she shows up on a use of force incident, what are you looking for as the supervisor of that officer?
Well, I'm certainly looking for the justification and the identification of, the need for that use of force. And, we remind ourselves as officers that our voice is our first weapon, and de-escalation is our first tool to remedy a situation that needs to be concluded in a safe way. So once the decision is made to go hands-on or take someone into custody, specifically who does not want to go into custody, that's typically when we face resistance. We have to make sure that everyone goes home safe at night, including the person that we're trying to arrest. So making sure that the officers have followed the guidelines, the general orders, calming the situation as a new person being introduced into a crisis, so to speak, a traumatic event for those involved, if we strip it down to the basics. Being a calming force, and calm breeds calm, chaos breeds chaos. So let's cool off if we can. If it's safe to do so, let's take a step back. Let's explain what's going on. And if that's not working, going hands-on, making everything safe, and then readdressing. We move back and forth between de-escalation and escalation of force as we see fit and as we see certain dangers being presented to us. So, there's a bunch of follow-up and paperwork and documentation that has to happen as well. That's so important so that we can provide those pieces of information, those statistics to the community when we are questioned, and we should be questioned and evaluated and analyzed for our, uses of force.
Okay. Tony.
When there's a use of force, it should be presented to the supervisor. I'm going to kind of go through the chain of command that it should go through. If it happens out on the street, first it becomes the supervisor. Then the supervisor will pass it on to the shift commander. The shift commander will pass it on to the IA investigator. The IA investigator will look into it, scrutinize it. If they see there's a problem, they will take it to the chief, and the chief will give a blessing to investigate it or not. Most IA investigations will not go forward unless there is a serious problem there. And if there's a problem there, the chief or the chief deputy will bless the IA investigator to go forward and have their investigation done. Right. And that takes time because you want to get everybody's side. It doesn't happen in a week's time. And I know that the citizens are saying I was violated and I want something to happen right away. It doesn't happen right away. It's a due process and it takes time. But as an IA investigator and being in that chair before, it takes time and you want to do it right because you want to make sure that everybody gets treated fairly and you don't want to miss a step and make something happen that shouldn't happen.
Right, and I'm glad you brought that up. I'm not sure if this is on my list of questions, so I'm just going to
Okay,
ask
I'm sorry.
this.
No, this-
So I may surprise you here, but so when it comes to use of force and investigating these instances, are they mostly generated by residents or are they generated mostly by the department? So for example, if there's a situation that happens, are they mostly generated by the department? You kind of look at it and you say, you know what, I need to investigate this and look at it. How does that normally happen? Was it
Sure, it's by policy. That's one thing I'm very big on. We don't wait for a complaint, nor should we. I don't think that helps the community. I don't think that helps the town liability-wise if we wait for a complaint. If force is used and there's an injury, we're going to investigate it. If force is used and like Sergeant Ruddy could say, you know, I just didn't like what was going on here or something, we investigate it. Bay Lounge is a perfect example. If you recall some of our responses to there, one of the responses was a significant group of people fighting in the middle of Mill Street. We brought that under the microscope. There was no allegations of anyone doing anything wrong, but we brought that under the microscope to see how did we respond to that. Are we responding? I wasn't even concerned so much about appropriately. I was concerned about officer safety. You know, there's a significant crowd in the middle of Mill Street, and we got 4 guys working. Are we making sure we're responding appropriately? But again, being Vienna's size, we have such a luxury because Tony's 100% right with the chain of the way a case works. We're so lucky. Every one of ours goes directly to Lieutenant Taylor, directly to him. Half the time he gets a page in the middle of the night that it took place. So he gets to look at it, and then we have our discussions as it moves up. And somewhere like Fairfax County, you'll hear early warning systems. That's always the big trend in policing, how to identify officers that use too much force or officers that use inappropriate or officers that show up on scenes. We all know these people that show up on scenes and make things worse. Right. How do you identify those people? That's one of the things I love about the Vienna Police Department and just the size. We identify them because we know them. If we have someone using force too much, you know, that's one of her 4 officers, and you know, I mean, we can pinpoint. We'll see the name, we see the case, 1 or 2 at a time. Like, okay, hey, we have a problem here, and it's identified immediately. Whereas the larger jurisdictions, you get a little bit lost in the bureaucracy. Like Tony said, the case takes a long time to work. You know, may have to match up the names. We don't have that problem here. It's, you know, very quickly identified if there's a problem.
Sure. So, you know, over the years, it's been about, I guess, about maybe 8 years we worked together. Mm-hmm. And, you know, every so often when there's something that happens in the media and we see that, I walk down the street to your office and, hey, Chief, what do you think about this? And so recently, I think you said in a staff meeting or two, and I think you said in a newsletter, something about police officer can't lose a fight. And so kind of like, okay, well, what do you mean by a police officer can't lose a fight?
Sure. I think a lot of people have a misperception of what use of force looks like. I think Art used the term as we were talking. It's unremarkable. It's not a wrestling match usually. It's a hands-on. It's a guiding. It's a steering. But when it does get to the point where it rises to the level of resistance, where you are aggressively going hands-on, you're using a tool. Unless you're doing something drastically wrong and illegal, that person needs to be arrested and needs to go to jail. And the community expects that person to be arrested and go to jail. And people sometimes don't want to do that. So that's what I mean by can't lose a fight. It's not a UFC fight where it's over, you shake hands, and you go away. This person is going to go to jail. And that's what has to happen, has to take place. And that's where the use of force is so important. And that's why it's such an important topic. It has to be appropriate force. It has to be an appropriate situation. You better know who you're arresting and what you're arresting them for. And also, most importantly, also, a lot of people forget the use of force policy puts a lot of emphasis on aftercare. Just because you used force on someone, even if you had to tase them, even if you had to shoot them, okay, the minute that's done, your obligation is now, and it is in policy and it is expected, it's to care for that person. It's to do CPR. It's to put a bandage over a wound, and we carry the gear to do that. So it's all those dynamics. So when I say can't lose a fight, I mean to infer that when force is being used, and if an officer is doing it necessarily, that person needs to be arrested. Whatever we've got to do to be arrested, the officer, if the officer loses that fight, officers lose their lives every year from losing fights. And bad guys, they don't want to go to jail. And if you're going to rise to the level of fighting a police officer to not go to jail, I don't want that person in my neighborhood.
Right. And I guess it struck me in the conversation, and it was like, because to think about an officer not losing a fight, it sounds a certain way, but then as I process it myself, I think about, well, if the officer loses the fight, now the individuals at large, or maybe, residents may be in jeopardy or whatever. So, and I guess kind of walking it out, it makes sense, but just to hear the phrase just kind of...
I should probably phrase it differently, but that's really what I mean, is just when it rises to the level of force, it's at that level. Thankfully, it doesn't get to that level very often at all, but when it rises that level, that's the level it's at.
Sure. So talk a little bit about the police department's policies related to use of force and findings or any changes that are part of the recent review in response to the Obama pledge.
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, we did update our general order, not because we didn't have information in there. We wanted it front and center. And as things happen, we've had a new use of force or response to resistance general order being reviewed by us for the last 18 months. So it was ready to go when the George Floyd incident happened. It's like, you know what, enough. We know we have all this in policy, but let's make it crystal clear in policy. So we released it to the officers. It addresses de-escalation, it addresses choking, it addresses a force continuum, how you're supposed to use force, it addresses reporting of force. It addresses a great deal of de-escalation. 75% of our officers are trained in crisis intervention training. It's used for the mental health industry. That's really what the training is based on. When someone's in mental crisis, there's techniques you use to communicate with them to try and keep people calm who are going through crisis. That whole training is de-escalation. That whole training is based on me letting you know I hear you, me reinforcing what you're saying to me. 75% of our officers are trained in that. I think the average nationally, Dan might correct, I think most departments are shooting to get 10%, 15% trained. We have 75%. We have every supervisor and secondary supervisor trained in that technique. So while it works for mental health type cases, people in crisis, it is also exactly what de-escalation is all about.
Got it.
I had a chance to talk to the chief, and he brought up something that if an officer in Vienna pull their weapon, they have to write a report. That is not nationwide. That's probably just here in Vienna, right? Because normally if you pull your weapon, and I was on the sheriff's office, you don't write a report unless you discharge your weapon. So I commend them for going beyond the regular approach of let's do more right now. So
That's good.
On that same note, too, the use of force reporting policies, that would be your use of force in and of itself. So if we go into a building and we're clearing it because of an open door, an alarm, a call for help, and we come across someone inside that building and we point our firearms during the act of clearing it with our firearm out, that is a use of force. Pointing our firearm at someone counts as a use of force. So a lot of times, use of force may be confused or viewed simultaneously or similarly to excessive use of force, and it's really important to distinguish between those two. To repeat what the chief said, a lot of our use of forces are unremarkable, where it's an incidental pointing of the weapon, or it's during an arrest and someone tenses up and we have to perhaps take them to the ground to make sure they don't get their arm free to swing at one of the officers or reach one of our weapons or a weapon that's in the environment. So use of force and excessive use of force, I think, are two different terms that need to be distinguished between, and realize that, you know, fights are messy. Our response to resistance is messy. Use of force is messy. It never looks clean. It never looks like the movies. It doesn't happen that nicely. And I think that causes a lot of confusion too. So when we are reporting use of force, it's important to say what a use of force is. And it could be simply coming across somebody with our weapon out and reporting that.
Has Vienna received use of force complaints? I'm quite sure we have. And then how are use of force incidents investigated?
A little bit like Tony says, use of force, it's investigated mostly through policy, because like we said, if there's an injury, it's going to get automatically investigated. If someone complains, it's going to be investigated. And as Tony can attest, it's an in-depth investigation. We want pictures, we want the report, we want interviews, we want medical records. Just basically to put the whole thing back together, not just for today, but as everyone knows, especially if you're talking a lawsuit, you have 2 years to file a lawsuit and a year to serve a lawsuit. So an event that could happen today, we may not hear about for 3 years from now. So we have to have factual information locked down at that point, and that's why in our policy, again, is, you know, photographs, statements, in-car video. We have in-car video, so all that's locked down as part of the investigation. I'm not sure I've had a use of force complaint. We've done a lot of investigations of it. I'd have to really look. I keep the IA log myself, so every case comes directly through me. I assign the number to it. I don't know if I've had one where someone is saying excessive force was used.
Sure. So I'm going to switch topics here to a little bit to hiring and training. A lot of times when we've had those talks, I walk down, to see you and say, well, what do you think about this shooting or that one in this community or that community in a different state or whatever? And you often talk about hiring and training. You talk about, well, that officer, should they have been on the force anyway? Talk a little bit about how hiring and training are keys to having really good officers. Kind of give us kind of a snapshot or picture of how that works well.
Well, that's really, to me, where this whole topic, both locally, nationally, starts. It's who is in police work, and who came into police work that shouldn't have been in police work. And that's always going to be a struggle. You want to hire the right people. You want people like Kristen explained why she became a police officer. That's who you want to hire. For a town like Vienna, I love when we can grab a Madison High School graduate. Because that person's built in, like a Tony, he's built into the community, knows the community. We have several of them, and it's really nice to have those guys. But it is all about doing your due diligence to recruit. Of all the people that take tests, I can't remember the number, but I think it's like 1 in 100, 1 in 150 move on to the hiring to get hired. So that's how many people get weeded out. You can't just come into the job. You take a written test. You get a psychological exam. You get a physical. You have to pass a physical agility test. You have to pass a lie detector. We lose so many people in the lie detector. And then you have to go through the background, drug use, and current climate, finances. A lot of people are in debt to a degree, but there's also, we look at how are you handling it. Okay, you have $12,000 in credit card debt. Are you making payments or you're not? Because to me, that's responsibility. If you have that sitting out there on 3 different credit cards, you're showing you don't have responsibility. And to me, that's a problem. So that's the mix, and that's the battle currently. And the current climate and the current environment's only making it worse. Because I'll be honest, you're watching police chiefs across the country retire. I know a lot of officers who are eligible to retire pulling the pin. I know officers who said, I'm going to go be a fireman. You just have, that's harder and harder. You really have to now rely on the fact you're community policing, interacting with the community, helping people. Because it's, as they talk about taking away an officer's immunity, defunding police, things like that, that's all negative, basically advertisement for us as we go out and recruit people. But we're not going to change our standards. So someone that fails a polygraph because they used too many drugs or because they lied, we're still not going to hire them.
Right.
So we need to make sure we can keep the right people going through the pipeline as best we can.
And so when you say you're not going to change your standards, what you're saying is that whereas we may have had 100 or 200 or 300 applicants in one batch, say,
Right.
and maybe 1 or 2 makes it through. Now we're getting maybe 75 or 50 applicants,
Right.
a smaller pool, but we're not going to lower our standards just because the pool's smaller.
Right, exactly. There's departments in California that you talk to, and they openly acknowledge they call themselves second chance departments. Officers who were terminated from one department and then come to this department. We will never do that. We go out. Tina Elias works for ART. Part of ART's function, Lieutenant Silmar's function, is hiring, recruiting. We don't even rely on phone interviews. We go to where you work. We talk to who you work for. We check your personnel file. If you're on another department, we check your internal affairs file. You know, we're looking for any stone unturned. I'm always a big alarmist if I see someone working for a police department for 3 years and they can't explain to me why they left. I really want, we're really, the bells and alarms start going off with those type things.
Absolutely.
And not only that, I think I believe the chief of Police Association in the state of Virginia is trying to pass a bill to decertify
Right.
bad officers. So if an officer did something in Vienna, they can take his credentials and he'd be decertified statewide. So any other department that he applied for will get that information, and that way we keep bad officers out of the public eye.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's kind of go on a little bit into some of the challenges of policing. I know that we just talked about hiring and training. What about the challenges related to maybe mental health calls and some of those? Maybe Tony, you could start and maybe kind of explain to us some of the challenges with the mental health calls.
A lot of calls will have a tie-in with mental health. In the Fairfax region in Vienna, we have a mobile crisis, which is part of Woodburn and Northern Virginia Hospital. They actually we can request that they come out and help us. I will let the sergeant do that a little more, but it's mobile crisis, and they actually are real great assistance to officers out on the street, especially when it comes down to mental illnesses.
Yeah, so Mobile Crisis is the unit that comes out when we call over to the Merryfield Mental Health Center, and that is the mental health program that Fairfax County offers its community. And Mobile Crisis is able to come out in pairs of 2 typically and actually be on scene and assist us in providing resources to those who might be in need of mental health services. And we utilize them a lot. If they don't need to come out, if it's not an imminent threat or an imminent crisis, but we know someone needs some follow-up care, I'm always calling them, maybe a little too much, because I like having the guidance of a professional. I did major in psychology, so I have some understanding of some basic foundational information, but I'm still not a professional. And I don't think it's appropriate that officers act as professional mental health members. So consulting with them is key on any call that requires mental health diagnosis or not. If the signs are there that someone needs services, we need to make sure we get them those services. And a lot of times awareness is the issue, where someone just doesn't realize all of these resources are available to them, and most of the time for free. So making that available to them. Someone who may be resistant to services, we can call Mobile Crisis, and they can work it into their schedule and do a home visit and actually go to the person's place of residence and make contact and kind of interject their resources to them in a way that they are receptive to, that maybe I don't have the life experience, the professional experience, however you want to put it, that makes someone receptive to seeking those services that they need. So we use them a lot. We do take people into custody when they are a danger to themselves or others, and they do get placed in handcuffs, for lack of a better word. They are detained and brought to the hospital under an emergency custody order, and then they're immediately evaluated by the mental health team, who are professionals and who can identify whether they are in need of a more permanent or an extended protective custody order, where they are placed into a mental health facility to receive the help that they need. So Merryfield is a huge resource for us that we use all the time. I think our reporting of that, or the community's knowledge of that, may be a little lacking. Maybe we have to do a better job telling our community that these services are there, so that it's not in times of crisis that they're finding out about it. They have it before it reaches a crisis. And that's where being such a strong presence in our community helps us, where we can kind of guide people like, hey, you can call this place. We have a victim advocates group in Fairfax County who's very proactive. We can connect them to victim services so that women or anyone in need of domestic violence help, they can seek the services they need before it reaches a crisis point where maybe use of force is necessary because someone has reached the point where they don't know what else to do. They back themselves into a corner, someone else backed them into a corner, and they react violently. So our goal is to deter and prevent before it reaches that crisis status.
Chief, anything that you would add to that?
No, I think Kristen described the program very well, and I agree with her 100% that it might be a little more outreach on our part to make sure people understand what's out there, and we use it all the time. Mobile crisis, I believe they have 2 units. They're on the police radio. They will call us, we will call them, because sometimes they'll go out and do an evaluation, and if a person is a harm to themselves or others, they're not going to do it alone. They're going to call us. Whether we initiated the call or whether they got it initiated another way, they just get on our radio, call us, and then we go and back them up as they do their thing.
Yeah. Kind of switching up topics here a little bit, but the same theme of challenges that police officers have. Talk a little bit about how you all process the whole national narrative whenever you have a Derek Chauvin situation in Minneapolis, and as a police officer, millions of people across the country, they see that, and then they kind of cast their view of law enforcement, I guess, across the country based on what they see Derek Chauvin do. I guess all 3 of you can answer. I'll start with you, Chief. How do you, I guess, process that as a police officer? And again, when we talk about it all the time, over the years, whenever that happens, but maybe kind of, as a police officer, talk about that.
Sure. As a police officer and just someone that's done this for 30 years, I think I'm on record, whether the Vienna Voice or the Gazette or something, it's disappointing. It really is disappointing that that's a police officer and that incident happens. You can't defend it. You can't explain it. You can't take any, use it as any type of good scenario. A lot of them, I always argue with Lynn, because there will be scenarios, and I'll debate people with. I'll say, no, you haven't been there. You haven't seen this. You haven't seen that. This is how it works. And then there's incidents like that where, that's not how it works. That's not even close how it works. That's not even remotely what should be done. Everything from, and as more video comes out, everything from the language being used to the 9 minutes to no medical attention afterwards. There's no good points to take from that. So for me, I know first thing we did, as we talked about, our policies, our teaching points. How are we in line here? Well, we go to roll call, we talk about it. We go to roll call and, make sure we're all on the same page with, preventative steps and training steps. Is there something we need to make sure we're training? That's why when Mayor DeRocco and then Linda came out with the Obama pledge, I was all for review policy, updated if needed, and we'll keep doing that. And to me, that's the whole point of it, because incidents like that, they just completely tarnish the profession. And like we talked about a minute ago, it makes it hard to bring someone into the profession.
Right.
And then it jeopardizes. You see so many side effects of that reach everywhere. They've reached Vienna from that incident.
Right.
And there's no justification for it.
Yeah.
From my standpoint, I think that watching the video, every officer that I know and talk to, it turned their stomach, okay? What happened was totally wrong. I don't believe any officer in the United States would agree with that, okay? It happened. But that's where we come to, like people being trained. It's very important to have good training officers, because on that incident, you had 2 rookies there. You had a training officer who was showing them something that shouldn't have never happened, okay? So it's very important that we get good training officers. So as departments, they need to pick the best of the best within the department to be training officers. And then when you do assign someone a training officer, you need to assign them more than one. Because if they are with this one person for 6 months or let's say 6 weeks that we're trained officers. Yeah, if they were to train officers for 6 weeks, and that's a bad trained officer,
Right.
then you get a bad officer. But if you divide it up and let them go 2 weeks here, 2 weeks there, 2 weeks there, you have multiple trained officers, I think you will have a better officer because they get to see what other officers are doing and not just taking it from one person. And I think out there, he was a bad officer, bad trained officer, and this is just my opinion. He doesn't deserve to be on a department, and he shouldn't have probably had been there.
Right.
And just to follow up, so it sounds as though if you have a bad training officer and then you have 2 rookies, let's say, that's learning this bad way of policing, it almost sounds like that's a bad recipe for those 2 officers now to go into their policing in that same.
Yes, because you learn in the academy the laws. You learn the procedures from your trained officer, okay? And if your trained officer don't do the procedures right, then you end up getting a bad officer. So it really comes down to a good trained officer can make a better officer in the rising.
Well, and in Vienna too, we have a 12-week training program, so we almost double the national standard of the 6 weeks, or the national average, I should say. And we have 2 formal FTIs, or field training officers, so they are automatically getting exposed to minimum of 2 training perspectives. And then a lot of the sergeants will also spend shifts with the trainee, making sure that questions are answered, perspectives are shared, and expectations are set from the start, so that there's no confusion or lack of knowledge for what that supervisor, what the department is expecting of their officers. And I think even beyond the FTI program, it's continued training where we are going to become CIT trained officers. We do participate in a peer support program where we are learning how to speak to each other, communicate more effectively. Debriefing is so important, and I know me and many of the supervisors will debrief things that even seem insignificant, especially when newer officers are present, because debriefing, when it doesn't matter, teaches people concepts in a non-stressful environment that translates to when that stress is placed on them. They now already have that skill, that ability, that perspective trained into them before stress. So when you add stress, they're that much more likely to know those concepts and apply them under stress, because we all know when stress hits, a lot goes out the window. So we want to make sure that the right procedures, the right responses, the right communication, the de-escalation, we want to make sure that's a technique that's a go-to. It's something that we do automatically just as easily as we breathe. So not getting complacent as we spend time in our careers, and 10 years in, 15 years in, we're always reevaluating and saying, you know what, I got a little heated, I need to take a step back. Or, hey, did you see how this officer did this? They de-escalated it with that one phrase. So remember that phrase, use it. You might, it might work for you one day.
Okay, thank you. So before we turn to the audience for questions, is there anything that any of the 3 of you would like to say that maybe I've left off, or you're thinking about now that you'd like to communicate?
Just to tag on to what Kristen said real quick for a minute, I think it's also the culture of your department. You have to have a culture where an officer, whether he has a day on, or a week on, or 20 years on, can bring things forward.
Yes.
If you see something being done improperly, you have to have an environment where that can be brought forward. That can be brought to your supervisor, can be brought to a commander, and get addressed, and not, have repercussions from it. That's in policy. I think it's in everybody's policy. But at the same time, you have to have an environment where that actually can take place. And that's why, to me, you talk open door policy, whatever you want. I don't want any doors in that police station closed. If someone wants to come in and talk to Art, he can talk to Art, talk to Tom, talk to me. Just give everybody the avenue and the exposure that if you have a question, if you saw something, the environment is, bring it forward.
Sure. Okay. All right, so, well, thank you, everyone here on the panel. I learned a lot just sitting here listening to you guys. That's why I walk down the street and talk to you all the time, Chief. So we have an opportunity here for the next hour or so to take questions from you all. Just a few things to mention. When you have your question, I think there's a microphone right here. Make sure that you stand close to where that red marker is on the floor, and keep your face covering on because different people are coming up to the mic. So just to kind of make sure that we're staying safe, let's do that. Try to keep your question to a minute, and try to keep your questions to questions. And then also make sure that we try to have one at a time so that other people can ask questions as well. So if you have questions at this time, certainly come up to the front, and we'll try to answer those questions the best we can.
Go ahead.
You can speak up. Yeah.
Good.
Kristen Ruddy.
I've lived in Vienna for a while now, to be honest, and I've gone to multiple protests in DC and educated myself more out there, more than in Vienna. But I've been working with a group in Vienna, and we've talked to multiple town council members about a lot of topics that we would like to understand from the Vienna Police Department itself personally, and haven't received the responses we wanted to hear. And I really don't know if it's because of our age or like if you don't understand, like I really don't know, but I really would like to ask you a couple questions at this point.
Sure, go ahead.
So like, what are the mechanisms in place for eliminating abuse of police power and overuse of force on Vienna residents, not only, but also Black African Americans in the town?
Can you take his mask off? So
I can't hear the question.
What are the mechanisms in place for limiting abuse of police power and overuse of force in our town that you see planning in the future?
Well, I think the mechanisms are, like we talked about originally, is policy and training. First, it's policy, so the officers know where we're going to be and know where the guidelines are, the restrictions are, the policy, and then second's training. Officers have to know what use of force training looks like and exposed to it all the time. We spend a great deal of time in the academy on use of force. So to me, that's where the whole issue gets addressed.
So, as you were talking about earlier, does Vienna Police ever feel overwhelmed or overextended dealing with such a wide variety of incidents? Like, speaking on what you said earlier about the size of the Vienna community, and I understand how you guys do receive help from Fairfax County when you need, and so, like, does that ever overwhelm any officers at any point in time or put a mental toll?
If I understand the question, I don't think it overwhelms the officers. We do get help from Fairfax County when we need, like specialized, the helicopter, the K-9. If we need extra manpower for an incident, I wouldn't say we've ever been overwhelmed. A lot of that comes from planning, preparing for things. If an example would be an event, well, even the Town Green event, when we had demonstrations at the Town Green, we worked with those groups and planned for it. Had we not done that, we probably would have been overwhelmed, trying to close Maple Avenue with 5 people, but we try to get up front and work with the planning of things, and then, not get overwhelmed. But we do have Fairfax there. Fairfax, as all you Vienna residents know, you pay taxes to Fairfax. They're not helping us out of the kindness of their heart. Those are our resources we're using. And they're, especially because of our relationship, we get them when we need them.
In 2019, Vienna ranked among one of Virginia's safest towns. #1, according to backgroundchecks.org, for 0.2 out of 1,000 violent property crime rate. Me personally, I really don't know why we need to. I really don't know why we need to spend $17 million of taxpayers' money and other facilitators on a new police station. I believe the money should be invested in education, teacher pay, and new infrastructure. But I really want to know your point of view on this subject.
Sure. Well, we'll start with that's going to be October, I think, on deck with Mercury, the whole topic. But I will answer for a minute. First off, the money for the police station is not taking any money away from education, not taking any money away from social services. It's a completely, different group. Vienna doesn't even do education, doesn't even do social services. It's out of the capital improvement program. It's funded by the meals tax. So you have that off the top of the head, but also a lot of what we talked about tonight is community. I know $17 million sounds like large sum, but that's property acquisition, that's planning, that's everything. If you go into the police station right now and look around, you know what we don't have? We don't have any community space, none, zero. If you come in and want to have this discussion with me, we're having it in the lobby. We're having it in the lobby with a woman who may have suffered from domestic violence, from a runaway, might be waiting for the parents to pick them up. We have no community space at all in there. We're storing property in storage units. I've heard some folks say, I'd rather add more officers than build a station. Well, you know what we can't do? We can't add one more officer to that building. The women's locker room, there's 10 lockers. Last count, I think we had 11 women, so they don't get enough lockers. That's really what it comes from. I understand the project, and I'll get on my soapbox in October. I understand the concern about it, and we have, from step one of this project, really tried to address the community. We know it's Vienna. I know we're not LAPD and going to build a Taj Mahal. We're trying to build absolutely the opposite. We're trying to meet the needs of what we need. And as we went down that road, and I still think it was a great concept, we talked about a plaza and community space. And I think that is money well spent for the town for, years to come. But again, October, we'll talk about it, lay everything out. I'll be glad to explain everything.
And I'll follow up as well. The chief's correct. In October, on my on deck with Mercury, we'll talk about the police station construction project specifically. But I will say briefly that the chief is correct when it comes to teacher pay. Teacher pay, those dollars flow through Fairfax County, through the county budget, through the school board, to the teachers. When it comes to social services, those dollars flow through Fairfax County over to the social services department. When it comes to the police department here, it's not really even the tax, real estate tax dollars that goes to the police department, the construction project. The capital projects are paid by the mills tax, and the mills tax are contributed by people who come from all over the region to eat at our restaurants here in Vienna. And so those are the dollars that go toward funding our road construction projects, this community center, police department. Those are funded by mills tax dollars. So they come out of basically people who eat at restaurants. So everyone go shop, eat at our restaurants, and that'll help out those funds. But that's kind of how it breaks down. So I agree with you with teacher pay and all those things. Those need to be fully funded, but those are different pools of financial resources than what's going to fund the police station project.
My last question. I understand you guys, in Fairfax County, from last time I looked this up, you guys started a trial run for body cameras. I don't know, we personally don't have it in Vienna yet. I don't know, we might, but I'm saying, how do you plan on implementing body cameras if you feel like that's a need in Vienna, personally?
It's funny, we actually had that discussion on the way walking over from the police station. A few years ago, we put in-car video in the car, and it's serving its need for us. Body cameras are good technology. It comes with a big price tag. It comes with a huge price tag, not just, everyone talks about the body cam. The body cam itself is probably $200. It's the $200,000 back-end storage of body cam video, and the $80,000 position for Freedom of Information Act. I think we're going to have this discussion in the coming months, year, and we're already talking about what would that look like for us. So I think it is something we're going to have to actively discuss if that's the step we want to take. But also in Fairfax County is a perfect example. They implemented, they got half of it in. They don't have the other half of it in. They did the same thing with in-car video. They got half of it in the system, they ran out of money. I don't want to do a half and half. If we're going to do it, I want to make sure we have storage capacity, however we want to do it. I want to make sure everyone has it, because the only thing worse than not having body cam is having it and then not having it when an incident happens. But for now, we are pretty successful with the in-car video program, and if officers are using that the way they should be, we're capturing video of incidents. It's not body cam, I'll acknowledge, but it is video of incidents. Body cam video also has limitations. If I get too close to you, body cam video is not going to do anything for us. You're not even going to get a picture. I'd rather have that overview of the scene from a car positioned properly. So there's pluses and minuses. I know it's a legislative topic that's going to be discussed, So it's definitely a good question. It's definitely a good topic to put on the plate because we will be doing it. We will be looking at it.
Our ICV video too has the capability of recording even if it's not within the camera purview.
Right.
So I use it all the time where if I see something going, someone might be upset with how we're handling something, or if I see a need to document what we're doing in a way that's not just our testimony, I'll hit that record button in a heartbeat just to make sure we have some sort of recording. It may not be visual, but at the very least it's audio.
Sure, absolutely. Any other questions from anyone?
Before asking a question, I just want to say I've lived here all my life. I've seen Vienna change, mostly for the good. That includes Vienna Police Department. I can remember times many years ago when some of the officers were not so admirable. One, in fact, had stolen a car before he was hired on to the police department. Another was dismissed for insubordination. But aside from those odd men out, the men and women who serve on a daily basis, put on a badge and uniform and serve and protect, even though Vienna is not necessarily the risky area that other parts of the country are. Men and women who wear the uniform still deserve a measure of our respect and admiration. They're worthy of that. And I'd like to ask that we all give a good hand to officers who do so on a daily basis. I want to say that I want to ask that we give a hand to all of the men and women who serve on a daily basis. Give a good hand. You can hear me. So. Thank you very much. My question was, even though I think you said that you have never had a use of force complaint here since 2013 in your years here, how many illegitimate use of force incidents have we had? Do you know if we've had any over the past, say, 2 decades? Just for context.
Yeah. Maybe some of the senior guys may have that. Someone who's been there a lot. We have not had any since I arrived. I don't know if we had any questionable force investigations over the years. Any of you guys do anything?
I've been here for 23 years.
Maybe come to the mic, Lieutenant Taylor.
Yeah, I've been an officer here for 23 years, and to my recollection, we haven't had any illegitimate uses of force.
Right. I'm pretty confident with that because, like I mentioned, I keep the use of force or the internal affairs log. I have the log dating back into the 80s. And I do go back and look at it over years just to see, and I don't recall seeing anything that I would question as, wow, that was a really bad use of force incident. And then we keep the files also, so if we did see one, we could easily pull it out.
I just wanted to have that out there for context.
Thank you.
Very much appreciate your service every day.
Sure, thank you. Thank you.
for coming.
My first part was I was wondering how large the force is.
Sure, it's 41 sworn positions. Like current example, right now we're 3 down, so we have 38. And that's 50 total employees because we manage the basically the 911 and dispatch operations for the town, the records, and the administrative function. So 41 sworn positions, 51 total positions.
Okay, and then my follow-up to that was I was wondering, just curiosity, I'm not wondering, like, are they multilingual, like Spanish, Korean, sign language? I mean, I'm just wondering how they'll be able to deal with the community if you can't understand them.
Sure.
That's what.
We have several. We do have Spanish speaking. Lieutenant Farhan, how many languages do you speak?
Right.
Yeah, so we do have it spread out.
So you bring him everywhere.
We do have it spread out. It's certainly a skill we like to bring in. We also have the language line, if need be, where we can. It's like a translator we call and everything. So it's certainly something we look for. If someone comes through the pipeline and if they do speak a second language, a third language, a fourth language, definitely something we're going to look at and appreciate.
Okay. I was just curious because it seemed like when I first came to Vienna in 2005, it seemed like, well, I'm in the southwest part, and it seemed like officers were just hanging out by the 7-Eleven waiting for the Hispanic community to go to the 7-Eleven, to get drunk, and then get them over for drunk and disorderly. But it's reading the police, I like reading the police highlights,
Right.
and it seems that's kind of faded down. Now it seems to be more raccoons that need to be euthanized, domestic disputes recently, a lot of that, and then the cars, everyone's getting broken, well, leaving the cars unlocked, and then
Right, and we do a lot. We've actually done we do still focus on the Hispanic population, but we do it in outreach. We're not necessarily trying to catch them coming out of the 7-Eleven. We're trying to catch them in their apartments and make sure they know the services available for them, and that, you know, because it's well known that various cultures report crime, and some do, some don't. And Officer Vasquez is our community resource officer. He does speak Spanish. No, he does speak Spanish, and he's always in those communities trying to interact and make sure services are being brought everywhere.
We do have mutual aid too with local agencies, so Fairfax and State Police, we utilize them a lot, where we'll reach out and say, hey, do you have this language available to us working? The language line is of course available, but it's over the phone, so in-person communication is ideal. So we use that a lot, and we do ask the person how they prefer to communicate. So if we do have someone who maybe communicate by sign language, they might not want an interpreter, they might prefer to just write everything out. We really place the request with them. How do you prefer to go forward with this?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And please try to speak up if you can.
Is there a way we can turn this up? Because I haven't heard any of the questions yet, so
There you go.
can people hear me? No. Okay. Well, I'll try to talk loudly. People who are interested in criminal justice reform talk a lot about qualified immunity. I don't know if people here know what that is, but I was hoping maybe you could talk about what your impression of what qualified immunity is, and whether it's something that would be important to get rid of or address in terms of helping improve the quality of policing.
Sure. I'm not going to give the legal aspect. I'm not that well versed in the legal. But qualified immunity is if an officer has a certain immunity to being sued, and stuff, if he's acting within the color of the law, if he's doing the right thing, if he is abiding by policy. A lot of times officers will get sued and they're removed from the lawsuit with their qualified immunity. That's my high level understanding of it. If it's something to be discussed, I'm sure it's a topic that needs to be discussed, it needs to be looked at just like everything else. The whole court system needs to be looked at, whether diversion's working, whatever. All those I think are on the plate. I can't say good or bad. It's a topic for officers because it is it's a recruiting tool. I'm worried for what it's going to do for officers coming into the field. If we remove qualified immunity, now they're liable. That's not real appealing to someone coming in, and we're asking them to go into situations where they may have to use force against someone, knowing they're going to be liable, even if they're using good intentions, even if they're following policy.
Well, I think a common misconception too with qualified immunity is that you cannot sue a police officer, and you can in fact sue a police officer if they are not acting in accordance with policy and law. So if you have excessive use of force, if you have an officer violating the law, if you have an officer violating policy, you can still sue them. So the liability is still placed on them if they decide to go outside of what they are allowed to do by their authority. So I think that's one of the first steps we have to do, is talk about what qualified immunity actually is, whether officers are actually immune from being held accountable for wrongdoing. We are. We can absolutely be sued. We can absolutely lose everything we've acquired throughout our profession if we don't act within the purview of our authority. So that's already there, but I don't think that's talked about enough.
Yeah, most lawsuits, when you sue the officer, you end up suing the whole department. So you end up suing the chief first. So it's in his best interest that his policies and procedures cover everything, because all lawsuits will have his name on it at the end of the day. Right. So it's up to that department to make sure that their SOPs and their general orders cover everything.
And the qualified immunity was created to prevent against frivolous lawsuits.
Yes.
So, I mean, you can file a lawsuit for anything, we all know this. Frivolous lawsuits are a huge part of our cultural issue in America in general, police related or not. So I think that protection in some sense needs to be there so that the frivolous lawsuits don't ruin a good person's motivation in being a police officer and serving as a good resource for the community. But we do obviously have to always be analyzing the policies and procedures to make sure we aren't taking advantage of, we aren't sweeping things under the rug, we aren't letting bad officers fall through the cracks.
Right. And just one last piece, it's not a guarantee, like Kristen says. It's actually most often heard by a judge. It's one of the first steps in a lawsuit. The judge will make a determination on the immunity or not. So it's not as if it's you can't do it. Like Kristen said, you can do it and a judge will rule on it as you move forward.
Sure. Again, and try to speak up if you can.
Can I just kind of move this up?
Yeah.
You can't understand anybody that's got a
Sure,
mask
sure,
on.
yeah.
Actually, my question is for Mercury
Okay.
and possibly the mayor.
Okay.
The national narrative, you brought it up at your last meeting and this meeting, it's been one-sided. Policing and law enforcement isn't only about the police, it's about the perpetrators have a responsibility to not resist arrest and to cooperate. Politicians have a responsibility to tell the truth and not demonize the police. And so does the media, and I don't hear that at all. So my question is, what can we do as a town to protect our police from being demonized by politicians, the media, and certain people that don't seem to not like police? My second part of the question is, what are we doing to stop these claims of racism in Vienna? I find this very upsetting. I've been here 22 years. I don't think Vienna is a racist town at all. And at the last meeting, you had a number of people that I think pretty much confirmed that. But I saw these videos of the kids, prior students from Madison, and it was pretty disturbing. Their claims of racism at Madison, the teachers, and also the police officers that were there to clap when they got their diplomas. And I just thought that was outrageous. What are we doing as a town to address these, I believe, false claims of racism and to protect our police?
Sure.
And can I go sit down?
Sure, absolutely. So I'll give that a shot, and then maybe the mayor can speak, and then the chief. The first part of your question, I think that it is quite clear that there are issues with regard to law enforcement contact with the black community and then with people in general. And that's a nationwide situation. It's not new to this year. It's not new. George Floyd's situation was not the first time that something like this has happened. We can go back to, when I was in college in the 90s, and even before that, you can go back, and there have been touch points where things just did not go well with a police officer and someone they're trying to apprehend. That doesn't mean that there's a pervasive issue. It means that in that instance, there was a problem. Some departments have systemic issues within the department because, Tony Thomas talked about that. If you have a trainer, and that trainer is a bad trainer, and is training officers, and then you're bringing up officers under the wrong way of doing things, well, you're going to have a department that just has that. So I think to get to the first part of your question, I think it's our responsibility, even though the national narrative will do what it does. The national narrative wants to get attention, wants to get media attention, wants people to grab hold of an issue and make that something that people can rally around, because there's a reality. There's a reality within it. Someone dies at the hands of law enforcement. That's a reality. That's true. Okay, so we have to look at that instance, and then what happens is something grows out of that, and then you look at police officers as a whole, and they wrongly get accused of being like that officer in that instance. And so in my view, the way that police officers here in Vienna, and across the country for that matter, can turn that narrative is person-to-person contact. It's a forum like this, it's a conversation like this, it's hearing from the police chief, it's hearing from Sergeant Ruddy, it's hearing from officers over here. It's when we have our police construction project, and once a week or so, the chief's going to be available to hear from the public to come in and ask questions about the police construction project. It's when we have festivals and events, and we have police officers there. They should be talking to residents and people on a constant basis. So I think it's not fair or right that we have to disprove the one incident. So we had an incident in this city, then an incident in that city, an incident across town over here. And then people look at that on the news and they say, well, I guess my town's the same way. Well, is our town the same way? We have to look at the facts and see, well, is our town like that? And I would say our town is not like that. However, it's our responsibility, right or wrong, to change that narrative. We have to tell the story. We have to use every single instance where we can have interaction with a resident or someone who's even coming through Vienna to tell a new story, because every instance that we have, we can tell a new story. And so I think that's the first part of that. The second part that you asked was about race, and what was that question?
Well, I would say claims of racism.
Claims of racism, right. Claims of racism, right. So I talked about that last month, and I'll talk about it here just for a few minutes, and that is, racism is in society. I mean, it is in society. That's something that is just true. To what degree does racism exist? And then we have to look at individual interactions. For example, I interact with many of you here tonight. I know you from being, lived in the community with you about 5 years before we moved over to St. Andrews. And so we have these personal touch points. And I would say that the more that we look at personal touch points and then tell those stories, we can say, well, are we a racist community or not? I would say that we're not. Are there racist people in our community? Probably so. There's probably racist people in every community. That's a reality. But I think, is there a pervasive racist problem in Vienna? I would say there is not. But I would say that we always have to be vigilant, because there are always going to be opportunities for someone to do something they shouldn't do, say something they shouldn't say, and treat somebody the way they shouldn't treat them. So I would say that I am bothered myself when I hear that a claim of that Vienna is racist. I would say that people need to address specific instances of racism if they see it in a respectful way, and then we can all grow. Because sometimes, there's a situation where someone may say something they shouldn't say, and so is my responsibility to just cast that person aside, or maybe I can say, hey, you said this to me and I didn't really appreciate that. Let's talk about that. Let's grow together so we can get better together. And I think we're a better society when we do things that way. So I agree with you and I understand. And whenever we see it, even in Vienna, we need to address it. But I can tell you that I don't think personally that there is a widespread issue of race in Vienna. But that doesn't mean we rest and say, okay, well, we're just going to move on with life. Because when we do see it in Vienna, we have to address it. And I think that's just the way life is. That's my part. You asked the mayor, and then I don't know if the chief. So, Mayor, if you wanted to say something.
Thank you for your comments. Can everybody hear me on this? So, to answer your questions about demonizing the police, and I can't do anything about what's going on nationally. But personally, and our town council, I think we have supported the police. I think showing our support by continuing on the path of building a new police station. Also, the chief and I work very closely together. We talk at least once a day. And I really try to get out and talk to as many people in the community as possible. I try to have very open door policy. People are, dinging me on Facebook, which is fine. They text me, they Facebook message me, call me. And any concern they have, I really try to, if I don't have the answer, I go to the police chief, and then I try and get the correct information out there, because I think some of the things that have been said tonight hopefully we can clear up some of the things about how mental health is dealt with in our town, and just other concerns that our citizens have. And so I think there's been a lot of things that have come to light. And if the more communication we can have back and forth, I mean, citizens coming to me or whoever on the town council, and then, I can talk to the chief and we can get the correct information out there. I think that's part of a way that we can start, and the police do so many community services. That's another way that they're always out in the community. So just the more things we can do there. I fully support our police. I think our council is trying to show that too. We issued a statement. We're trying to put a lot of information on our website and just directing people to go there. And the second thing you mentioned about claims of racism. So, Mercury Payton answered that. I support his answer very, very much on that. We're not a perfect town like, any other place in the world. So I'm sure there's racism going on, I'm sure. I also, personally, I grew up in this town. My family and I really have a lot of different groups in town and just a lot of friends of different backgrounds. And so I really try to talk to people a lot, and I hope they feel comfortable coming to me. It would hurt me just personally and just as how much I love my town and our residents if things were going on that I didn't know of. And that's probably true, but I'm hoping that we can continue these kind of conversations and bring more people into, our community and just get them active in things. We have some plans coming up that we're going to announce, and that will involve more people. And I think doing that is going to just continue this conversation. And did I answer that? I think I did. There's of course more I could say. So if anyone here, and this is something that I just want to continue hitting home, is that as mayor of the town of Vienna, I want everyone to feel comfortable coming to me with any claim. And I may not see it the same way you do, but if that's the way you're seeing it, then we need to address it. And so that's how we'll move forward on that.
Sure.
I'm not going to address the first part, but I will address the second part. The second part is the perception of what I see, okay? You may not see it as racism, but if somebody says something to me and you and we stand in there, I will take it a different way because of my race. So if there's something out there, it could be. But you got to walk in that individual's shoes to understand why they said racism. And the way you do that, you have communication. Talk to that person. Ask them, why do you feel that was racism? They might be able to explain to you why they thought that, and then that would help you clear up and go, okay, maybe there was something that was inappropriate said at that time. Okay? You just cannot say, well, they are claiming racism. They claim it because of their background. They claim it because of their past. So just don't blow it off, because it could be something there that we don't know about. So
right.
They're not fake racism complaints. It could be something there. But again, it's each person. Now, me and Peyton, we could be sitting here talking and you could come up and say something and he might say, Tony, I didn't see anything wrong with that. But where I came from, there may have been something that was inappropriate with that. And you're talking to two black males. Okay? So it's their perception of what they hear and what they see. So, and the best way to get around that is through communication. If we talk about it, you can find out, and then you can move forward with it.
All right. And I'll also mention too that we have to look at people as individuals, and those individual claims are oftentimes out of pain in some sense. So just because someone says, well, Vienna's racist, what they may be saying is, I had an interaction with someone white who treated me this way, and it was really unfair, and the person said something that was prejudiced or racial or whatever, and in that instance, they're saying, okay, well, Vienna's racist, because maybe they, like Tony said, maybe they had an interaction that was a racially motivated interaction, and so they may be overstating, saying, well, all of Vienna's racist. What they're saying is out of pain. They're saying something happened to me that wasn't fair, and so I think that might be part of. Sure.
Mr. Thomas, I understand exactly what you said, and that's not what I'm addressing.
What? Okay. Okay.
And it's a false claim or it's not racism, we have no mechanism of letting the town know that. People that are making claims have mechanisms, Facebook, there's websites, there's other there's Facebook pages. They're making these claims and nobody is giving them a counter argument. I'm talking about after an investigation.
Okay. Well,
That's the problem.
right. Okay.
I understand.
Right. Okay.
Right.
After the investigation, the department will come up with unfounded or founded. And we don't share that with the information besides the individual that filed that complaint. It's not up to us to go out to the world and say, hey, that was false reporting. It's up to us to make sure that we investigate it and come back with the appropriate thing. And if it's unfounded, it just stays within the department and between the complainant and the department. Because they don't go to the newspaper and say, hey, Tony Thomas came up with a complaint of racism and it was unfounded. No. And that's sad. But you have a right to go out there and keep on saying that, hey, Vienna or whatever was racial and hostile to you. But the department doesn't have a mechanism to go out there and spread it that it was unfounded. So that's where they stand. The chief can.
And Chief, yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. And but that is also one of the reasons. There are a few incidents that automatically generate internal affairs cases. One of them is racial profiling. Just like Tony said, it's so we can get to the bottom of it, so we can get both sides of the story. If anyone files a complaint and says, I was racially profiled, I was discriminated against, that is 100% automatic. We don't even try to talk you out of it. We do an investigation on it. And it's for that reason. But you're also right, yeah, they're personnel files at that point. We can't just go release them out and defend ourselves. That's where we get back to question number 2, community policing. Even in this environment, I can tell you, we walk all over town. We get thank yous, we get horn honks, we get, people bringing cupcakes, meals to the station and everything. The community has supported us. And I think that is because of years and years before I ever arrived here, of doing good policing and being out there and treating people right. And when there's a problem, just like this situation with Minnesota, nothing hurts to review your policies. Nothing hurts to look at your stats. Nothing hurts. We can always do something better. Even working with the mayor, she alluded to it. One of the topics that came up was, hey, what about community interaction? We're talking, and we'll work on the coming month, is coming up with a public safety committee with council, where maybe the mayor appoints a council member, I appoint command staff, we bring in a community member or two, and we review everything. We review our policies. We review questionable incidents. We review, give the community somewhere else to go. So there's always things we can work on, we can fix. Our response to resistance general order looks a lot better today than it did back in March. So there's always things we can fix. There's always things we can do. So I don't hesitate the comments, the concerns. If someone has a complaint, I want to hear it. What I do though is if I hear it, I'm not going to automatically defend my officers. We're going to investigate it. I think we have an amazing police department, every single one of them. I think they do this town justice. I think this town can be proud of them. But at the same time, we do have checks and balances we need to make sure we have in place.
I think too, I'll just be brief, but the responsibility does start with us as officers to make sure that we are communicating with the people we're interacting with in a way that makes them understand why we are talking to them, stopping them, and communicating. And I have been directly accused of being racist or having racist motivations for doing my stops. And I think it's our job to not immediately get defensive of those accusations, because we don't know what perspective the other person we're speaking with is having until we communicate with them. So if we immediately get defensive, now we're just going to have a battle of egos, and it's just going to escalate beyond anything, beyond repair. So it's important for us as officers to have conversations with people and explain, no, listen, this is why we're stopping you. And if that person is able to explain to us why they feel that they're racially profiled or we were being racist, because implicit bias, implicit racist does exist in every person, not just in policing. And we do have to recognize that perspective is there for some people and not others. And it's our social responsibility to each other to communicate that and understand different perspectives that maybe we haven't been exposed to. But the understanding is not going to come if we're not communicating. And we have to make sure that communication is done appropriately and productively and constructively, and not just a battle of pointing fingers and accusations and fighting or escalating.
Good evening. I'm Stephanie Finney. I've been a citizen of Vienna all my life. I actually still live in the house I grew up in. I just have a bigger bedroom because we remodeled some years ago. But Mercury and your panel, thank you for joining us or holding us this evening. I have one question and then more of a comment. There's been a lot of racial tensions over the last few years, not even the most recent one, but even before that. Right. As a citizen of the town of Vienna, because I live in the town and I pay town taxes and I pay Fairfax County taxes. As a citizen, when I call on my police officers to come help me with something and they don't show up because I feel threatened, what am I supposed to do with that? Give you a quick scenario. I'm driving, it's a side road over here by Air Hill. Two citizens, I assume they were citizens, they were walking, they were drunk, they were white. I called the police because they started saying racial slurs and shouting Black Lives Matter, trying to be funny. So I called the police office, non-emergency at that time, because I was threatened, but I was in my vehicle and they were walking. Me and my husband sat on that street probably for a good hour just to see if town of Vienna was going to answer my call, and it was never answered. So, again, is there racism? I would say yes, there is racism in the town of Vienna. Is it among our police officers? I don't know if they thought it was a joke or if they just thought it was, oh, this lady's off her cuckoo, but I explained who I was, I explained my race, and I explained the race of the people who were being racist, if you will. So that's my first question and comment. Not sure why it was never answered, but I didn't appreciate it. I'll let you all know here tonight, I don't appreciate that. If I call you as a paying citizen of the town of Vienna community, I expect a response. That's number one. Number two, Vienna Voice. I was reading your article. George Floyd died on May 25th. When you say officers don't lose a fight, I would just recommend that you use your choice of words a little better, because that could be very disheartening to someone who is just picking up the article, a new member of the community. I'm reading here it now. I'm reading it, making sure that I'm articulating everything that you were trying to say. Even when you tried to explain it this evening, it didn't sit well with me. So from a citizen, I would say use your words a little better when you're being interviewed. You also mentioned something about an officer has a privilege. It's a privilege to be an officer. It absolutely is. But you also mentioned, if I think you mentioned if you shoot someone, you also have to care for them. So it seems that, again, that seems contradictory to me. As an officer, you said you have the ability to take away someone's privileges and rights. No other profession has that capability to do that. Can you expound on that just a little bit more? Are you trying to say I have the authority that I can do whatever I want? Or, I mean, what was the point of referencing that?
Sure, I'll try and touch on it, and I'll do it in reverse order. The point I was trying to make is an officer can take someone into custody, yes, with cause, yes, with a crime's committed, but they can take you into custody, they can remove your freedom to walk down the street. That's a pretty monstrous responsibility to me. It needs exercised properly, but that is what an officer has the ability to do and is entrusted with that based on his training, being sworn in, and policies and the law. That's kind of what I was saying, was it's a significant authority an officer has and can wield, and wielding improperly can be a problem. Wielded properly, that is still an enormous responsibility of an officer. I agree with you on can't pick a fight. Mercury teed up on that. I tried to explain what I meant tonight. I wasn't. I just meant a lot of people I think use of force is not a game, but like a street fight, like two people fighting, or like a boxing match. It's really not that, and it shouldn't be that. And that's kind of what I was trying to say with that. I wasn't trying to demean what use of force is, or to minimize use of force, or to be flippant about an officer can't lose a fight. What I meant was, If a criminal needs locked up, they need locked up, and the officer has to have the ability to do that, is where I was going. Police response, that's completely unacceptable. I can't, again, it's one of these incidents where I don't know the circumstances. I would ask you to see Lieutenant Sillmore and give me the date and time and your contact information, and I'll get back to you. There's no excuse. No, it doesn't matter white, black, any color. If you call the police, you're going to get the police. That's why we're here. I don't know if there was a mix-up on, because a lot of times they ask you, want to see the complainant, did an officer check the area? But I still would expect you to see it, even if the officer didn't think you were a complainant waiting, you would stay there. I'd expect you to at least see a cruiser go by, even if there was a misunderstanding whether you wanted to be seen or not.
The two people that were stating something, they were drunk in public.
Right.
That's a whole other thing, and I explained that.
Right. No,
But
that's
again,
why
I guess there was just no, you didn't feel a need that you needed to come out. Oh, they're probably just walking home. I'm sure that was the thought.
Oh, we come on. Well,
I
again,
don't know.
I'd like the opportunity to look into it, because that's really not the perspective
Okay.
we should be ever taking, regardless of the circumstances. I tell everybody, call the police. We're not busy enough that we can't come out for calls.
Right.
So if you'd see Lieutenant Sillmore, seriously, I'd appreciate if you could give him the date, time, so we can research it.
Sure. And then the last thing is, like I said, George Floyd died on May 25th. We were out here protesting on Maple Avenue sometime after that. You say your police are community focused, that sort of thing. Only thing I saw was your police officers sitting in their vans in the air conditioning. I didn't see them kneeling with the community. I didn't see them engaging. I didn't see them. I don't know what you saw, but I did not see them.
I mean, again,
And I saw the ones down here just waiting for being, traffic control, again, sitting in their car, waiting for people to disperse. So I would say you have probably a really chummy job because it is an easy community to police. But I would just, again, if you want to get into your community, learn more about the people that live in the community, not just who you see most of. You're going to see more white people and black people because that's who lives here mostly. But there is a pocket of community that has grown up here. My son just graduated from James Madison High School. I'm sure you've heard his name, John Finney. If you've gone to a Madison football game or basketball game, you've heard his name. So that's what I mean. I have been here since I was born, and I'm not impressed with what I see as far as the engagement. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. And I'll just follow up. At that the protest, the chief was there, I was there, and there were other officers there who were not on duty, but they were there in attendance and knelt and other things as well that day. So I just want to just kind of clarify. Right. But again, and you make some good points, and definitely you should contact Lieutenant Sillmore about that incident and give it a day and time, because we do need to find out who it was that received that call, and we need to find out why they didn't respond.
All right, I'm like the last speaker. I've been living in Vienna all my life too, and interaction with the police is rare. I only call the police when I see something going on in my neighborhood, but when the police come, it's always late. The incident is always gone. I always call about people racing up and down Courthouse Road. I never see a police on Courthouse Road unless he's looking for people speeding. I live at the end of the street. They're always speeding. Mm-hmm. And they're speeding up and down Nutley Street too, around 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I've called the police. Nobody ever comes, and I'm very upset about that. And I also want to know, what's the diversity on your police department? I don't ever see a black person on the police department. So when you tell me what your diversity plan is so that everybody else will know what it is in Vienna.
Sure. We don't have a black police officer right now.
Are you planning to get one?
I've hired the one that came through the door. We will take, it's the process. I do think we need to do a better job recruiting. I mean, in different communities or something, certainly we will hire black police officers. I know it's nothing but an advantage of the department to have black police officers. We lost the one we hired, I guess it's been a year and a half ago. We had a young George Mason graduate, very great police officer. He was amazing. It turned out he was too amazing, and there were too many opportunities for him other than being a town of Vienna police officer. But again, Art does our recruiting, and when they get through the process, I would love to hire black police officers. I'd love to hire qualified police officers. We're 15% minority, but we do not have any black police officers.
Have you ever found out why? Do you ask why? Do you ask the person why they're leaving, or what is going on that they don't stay? Because there's got to be a reason they don't.
Well, no,
stay.
well, I can tell you this story. This officer didn't stay because even when he came in, he talked about his family and friends weren't really keen on him being a police officer. And then he had an opportunity to go get an advanced degree, which backed up with a very good job out of police work, and he jumped at it. And that's why, I couldn't blame him for jumping at it.
But I do like to see a black police officer on the force. So if you can work on that, I appreciate it.
I agree with you completely.
Thanks everybody for having this here tonight and taking our questions. You've talked a lot about telling the story about the good job that Vienna police are doing, and I think that one of the ways that we can do that is by gathering more data and being more specific in it. One of the things we're hearing a lot about is that, as best I understand, that right now the town of Vienna does not keep racial data about police interaction with the public. So we don't have a resource to look at to see exactly how we're doing that job as well as we could be doing it. I think that could kind of deal with a lot of the questions that you've been answering here about how you do the job, about how the police are perceived, about how the public sees the job you're doing, about whether or not implicit bias is showing itself and maybe training's not doing enough to we can't even answer whether or not it is because we don't have that data about who's being interacted with at what rates, and then how that interaction is moving through the various stages of either helping people get the resources they need, if if use of force is necessary, if they need to be arrested, if their citations need to be delivered. But the more information that we have, the more we can see ourselves clearly. And the plural of anecdote is not data. Data is data, and until we collect it, have it public, we're not really getting the full picture. And so I wanted to know if there was a plan for that. And then two, I wanted to ask, you guys have talked a lot about your pride in your work and about how you see it as helping people in crisis. And I wanted to know if there are policies about the culture of policing, particularly things that we see, and this is, I can't say that I've seen it in Vienna, but I've seen it nationally, about like the warrior culture of police. You see people displaying Punisher skulls with the blue line on them, people using Spartan helmets as police insignias and things like that, where we start to wander into some of the weird insignias of white nationalism and stuff getting mixed up with police identity. Is there any policy about displaying those kinds of images inside the police department or on personal vehicles, particularly like Punisher skulls and things like that are really kind of anti-community?
Just addressing the policy issue, we certainly have unbecoming issues. We're still struggling with the tattoo policy, to be honest with you, as nationally they are, every tattoo, but officers can't have any derogatory racial tattoo, anything like that. You're not even gonna get hired if you have something like that. Inside the station, same thing. It's not your facility, it's the town's facility. So you're not gonna have that same thing on a car. You're not gonna have that. The one area where we do, like I said, struggle a little bit is tattoo. How much tattoo can you have a sleeve? What if there is a skull on it? What does that mean? We end up in those arenas. Stats collecting, I think you saw in the Vienna Voice, we do some. We have stats on use of force, we have stats on arrest. We've accumulated traffic stop information now, so we have those statistics over the last few years. And as for a plan moving forward, the state sort of did that for us. The state came out with a community policing data collection effort. So as of July 1st, all traffic stops, now I know you're talking beyond traffic stops too, but all traffic stops will need to be documented and quarterly submitted to the state, which then a report can come back out from the state. The downside to that is they didn't fund it, so it's an unfunded mandate. And then also one aspect, which I'm kind of on the fence on, in Vienna, Vienna was one of the last jurisdictions left where you could get pulled over and just get yelled at. You could get pulled over and an officer would tell you, hey, you need to pay attention. You rolled that stop sign. That has to end. Every traffic stop has to have a piece of paper with it now, whether that be a warning, whether that be a summons, because we have to show in documentation, in data to the state that takes place. So that's what's going on now. July 1st, that takes place with the state mandate.
Does that include a tracking the racial identity of the
Yes.
that you're interacting with?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And can I say, as far as stickers on cars?
Yeah.
Most officers don't put stickers on their cars because they don't want to be seen.
I understand.
Okay. Prime example, I went camping 3 weeks ago, and I ran into like 8 cars that had something to do with police officers. Me being a police officer, I stopped, hey, how you doing? What department do you work for? None of them was police officers.
Right.
But they had all the signs on it that there was. Most 99% police officers will not let you know that they're a police officer until they put that uniform on. Because we want to go out in the community and enjoy the community just like you, without somebody's going, hey, what about this? What about that? So I would say that it's a lot of times that those vehicles you're seeing are probably not police officers.
Thank you.
Regarding community policing, what % of the Vienna police officers live in the town of Vienna?
None.
I don't think any.
How about Fairfax County?
I don't know the percentage. We do have officers living in the Centerville area, so there are some officers in Fairfax County. It's not a large portion, though.
How many town residents enter the police station every year?
I don't think we ever have done walk-in totals. I mean, we have calls for service, but a lot of those aren't walk-in complaints. So I honestly can't answer that for you.
How many people are put in the Vienna jail every year, even if it's just temporarily?
Well, we don't have a jail, so it'd be the Adult Detention Center in Fairfax County.
Do you have a holding cell?
No, we do not. We have hard interview rooms that are secured for an interview, but you don't stay there.
I'm not sure if this was already asked because I couldn't hear. How many times in a year or in the last 5 or 10 years does a Vienna police officer draw their weapons on people in the line of duty?
Well, that's in our use of force statistics, so I think 8 times. I think it was 8 times last year, and that's usually about the average.
My understanding is that 0 is the number of times that a Vienna police officer has fired their weapon in the line of duty in the last 10 years. Is that correct?
10 years?
At a person.
At a person? Okay,
Yes.
yes, I think so.
I'll get it clarified.
Yeah, I know there's one case, but it's probably outside the 10 years scope.
How many times a year over the last 5 years have Vienna police cars been vandalized while parked in the Vienna police station?
Well, I can tell you an officer's car was damaged in the parking lot, his personal car. That happened about 6 months ago.
Pipe bomb in the Chiefs.
Yeah, your time frame, probably I'm going to say none within your time frame, but if you go back historically, there were significant. Someone drove a truck into an unsecured police parking lot and ran over a bunch of cruisers. 2 chiefs ago found a pipe bomb underneath his car. We've had a suicide in the back lot, a suicide in the front lot. So the time frame's a little off. 5 years doesn't really pin everything down, but historically there has been.
And the suicides was within like the last 2 or 3 years, right?
Yeah, suicide was about 2 to 3 years ago.
Right.
My understanding regarding the cost of the new Vienna police station, I heard 17 million. Is that still correct?
The 17 million number is correct if you add in the cost of the purchase of Locust Street House 7 or 8 years ago. If you add in the cost of the needs assessment, which was also done 8 or 9 years ago, and then the project management, architect, and then the construction.
And design.
In this
And
year's
design.
bond is actually $14 million for building the actual facility.
And the design work as well.
Yeah, and the design work.
Right.
Okay, and just to correct your statement earlier, you said that is funded completely by the meals tax. My understanding is that some bonds have been issued, so then that wouldn't be completely
Right.
funded by the meals tax.
So, yes, it is completely funded by the mills tax. The finance director is right there. I don't know if she wants to come forward, but the bond issuance is supported by the mills tax itself. Marion, is there any, you could come forward? Marion, come to the mic.
The town of Vienna goes to the, can you hear me right?
Yes.
The town of Vienna goes to the bond market, we issue bonds, the bonds are paid back with by meals taxes.
Yeah,
So no general fund revenues are paying the bonds, which pays for all of our construction projects.
Okay. Thank you, Marion.
Hi. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you for being here. I had a question for you, Chief Morse, about your interview that was in the town newsletter this month, which cited that last year, I believe, in Vienna, 31% of arrests were of black people. Is that statistic correct?
Yes, if it's in the newsletter, that's going to be correct.
Okay. So at last month's On Deck with Mercury, it seemed like we didn't have an exact statistic, but the estimate was that the black population of Vienna was like 2%. Would you guess that that's true?
That's 2.7, I believe.
Okay, so would you agree that there's a discrepancy there? Because that seems to me like 15 times more than the population of black people in Vienna. So I guess my question would be, do you agree that there's a discrepancy? Why do you think that is? And like, what are actionable things you're doing to fix that problem?
Well, I don't think it's that easy of math, to be honest with you, because 99% of the residents of Vienna don't get arrested. So those arrest statistics are based on the entire region. And also, if you look at our numbers, those arrests are based on total number of arrests. A 87 total was the arrest total. Of those, 67 or 19 of those were town residents. I'll be honest with you, I'm not overly alarmed with that number. I think I have to take it in perspective with the region. I think I have to take it in perspective with other police departments in the region and what their numbers are. And I'm not overly alarmed by it. I mean, it's something I'm certainly going to track. It's something we're going to keep track of. I don't want to see it go up. We just did traffic stop data, and black motorists are 8% of our traffic stops. Again, that's more than the Vienna population, but also, as I'm think everyone's aware, Vienna population is not our entire audience for writing traffic tickets. And if you go regionally, those numbers, that's why I'd ask you to compare them regionally, those numbers are astronomically different in other parts of the area. So alarming, no, because of one or two numbers, using the numbers we have, one or two are going to throw that statistic way up or way down based on one incident or one arrest.
So you would not agree that those statistics indicate a disparity? Or do you think that you would need more information to make that?
I want more information. I'm not going to say they're disparity based on the numbers. I'm not going to compare it with the 2.7% population of Vienna, because that's not fair. If you look at statistical numbers, anyone that issues an annual report, anyone that documents those, they will have that waiver on there, that these numbers, that it's not a reflection of the population you're serving, when 99% of the population you're serving does not get arrested.
Are there statistics we could be keeping or ways that we could check to make sure that that isn't a disparity that exists? That's my last question.
Well, the state data collection, historically, I think a lot of it is based on traffic stop data, to be honest with you. That's the touch point where you're touching the most people you're looking at. Also, use of force information. When you start getting numbers of use of force, I know Fairfax County's released numbers, and they have concerns over their use of force numbers when it comes to minorities. So I think all these are valid numbers, but they have to be interpreted. They have to be looked at properly. I'm not saying we don't have a concern to look at. I'm not saying we don't have a concern to address. I'm just not going to jump to say that number needs to be 2.7, because I don't think that's accurate.
Thank you.
Okay? Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll follow up a little bit and say also that I think that we want to look at other factors as well, and when we look at trends, if we see some trends that are going in some direction that we don't want them to go into, that we'll look a little deeper to see, okay, why is the trend line moving in that negative direction? So I think that you're hitting on a good point. We need to maybe look at that data and continue to track that and make sure that it's not moving in the wrong direction, and start asking questions why and address some of those.
That's it. I mean, and she's 100%. You collect that data to use it, and that's what the goal is, to use it and interpret it and see where it does trend up, down, and that's really the goal with it.
Okay. Any other questions? We have about 4 minutes until we're at our end of our discussion.
To add on to what she said, we don't just serve the Vienna community, the Vienna residents. We serve anyone coming into the community as well. So our daytime population skyrockets. So those numbers are automatically skewed and aren't necessarily collected because we don't track the race of every person who crosses our borders. So I think that has to be taken into account when you look at those numbers as well.
Right. Any other questions? Well, thank you for coming out this evening. Thank you for asking tough questions. It makes us better and a stronger community when we can have an open dialogue like this and we can learn from each other. That's what I aspire to do whenever we have one of these on decks with Mercury. Please give our panelists a hand here. Thank you. You've got a hard job to do, and I appreciate what you do, and I know that you have a big heart to want to serve the public in this way to keep everyone safe. Just want to remind everyone as we leave tonight, we want to make sure that we are staying safe with regard to the pandemic. So there's 4 pillars of that, and that's wear your face coverings, wash your hands, stay home if you're sick, and remember to stay 6 feet apart if you can. Next month on Deck with Mercury is going to be most likely on the capital improvement plan that we have going forward. Every September we go before the town council in work session and share our long-range plan. I think it has a 2034 plan. So in September we'll look at that and just have that discussion here. And then also in October we'll be talking about the police station construction project going forward. So please look out for those dates, and we look forward to continue to serve the public here in the town of Vienna. And again, thank you for coming to On Deck with Mercury. Have a wonderful and safe evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I know. I hate that.
I know. Oh, the mic's.